I've dug graves most of my life, and I thought nothing down there could ever scare me. But one night, I came to the cemetery and found a grave that was already open. Since then, I can't forget what I heard beneath the soil, 3 slow knocks, and a breath that wasn't mine. Greetings, every shadow hides a story. Welcome. Under the bed. It happened 17 years ago, in a small town called Ridgevale, surrounded by pine woods and mist. I was 37 back then, and I'd been working as a gravedigger for almost 15 years. My name's Ronnie. I've buried hundreds of people, in all kinds of weather, in all kinds of silence. You get used to it, at least, I thought I did. That evening in late October, rain was already falling when the phone rang. It was Hank, the cemetery caretaker. His voice was shaking, not from fear, just exhaustion. "Ronnie, I need you to come in. We've got a service tomorrow at 10, but the grave's not ready. The family moved the date last minute. I can't get anyone else this late." I remember looking out the window. The streetlight outside flickered through the fog. It was already close to midnight. I told him I'd come. Night digging wasn't unusual. We often worked with flashlights when schedules got tight. But that night, something felt heavier in the air, as if the storm carried more than thunder. I loaded my tools, 2 shovels, a lantern, a thermos of coffee, and drove the old Ford down the empty road toward the cemetery. The wipers squeaked against the glass, struggling to keep up with the rain. When I turned off the main road onto the dirt path, my headlights caught the crooked gate. The wind pushed it back and forth, letting out that dry metallic sound I'll never forget. The Ridgevale cemetery wasn't big. It sat on a low hill, surrounded by oak trees and a broken fence. Half the graves dated back to the early 1900s. Some names had already faded into the stone. I parked near the tool shed, killed the engine, and stepped into the mud. The air smelled of wet earth and something faintly sweet, like flowers that had died weeks ago. I checked the logbook inside the shed. Plot B7, lower section, near the old birch. Supposed to be a new site, clean, and used ground. I grabbed my lantern and started walking through the rows. My boots sank with each step. Every time the wind moved, the old trees creaked like they were whispering to each other. I kept telling myself it was just the rain and my nerves. When I reached the far end of the cemetery, I noticed something odd. The grass near the new plots was flattened, and fresh leaves were scattered across the stones, even though I'd cleared this area 2 days earlier. It looked like someone had been walking there recently. Maybe kids, I thought. Maybe Hank checked the markers earlier and forgot to mention it. Then I saw it. Plot B7. The ground was already open. A perfect rectangular pit, darker than the night around it. The soil was damp, pressed, and uneven, as if it had collapsed, but the sides were too smooth for that. I froze, holding the lantern out. The beam caught the inside of the hole. It wasn't empty. At the bottom, there was something black, stretched tight like a heavy tarp or a bag. The rain made it glisten. I leaned closer. My breath fogged the glass of the lantern. The thing didn't move at first. Then, just as I shifted my weight, the surface seemed to shiver, like the earth itself took a breath. I stumbled back, nearly slipping in the mud. The lantern flickered. For a few seconds, the only sound was the wind rattling through the gate. I tried to tell myself it was just water pooling or a trick of the light. Still, I couldn't look away. The shape was still there, waiting. I called Hank on the radio, but all I got was static. I waited, listening. Nothing but the storm. I thought about leaving, but the idea of turning my back on that open pit felt worse than staying. I took a few cautious steps closer again. The rain had stopped. The cemetery was silent, too silent. Not even the trees moved now. And then, right before the lantern dimmed completely, I noticed another detail that froze my blood. The shovel marks on the edge of the grave weren't mine. They were old. Rust-colored. And beside them, barely visible in the mud, were footprints, bare, human, leading away from the hole and disappearing into the darkness between the graves. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the truck, staring at the hill through the windshield, waiting for the first light of dawn. Because deep down, I already knew someone had dug that grave long before I arrived. And whatever was inside it hadn't been put there by us. I didn't go home that night. I sat in my truck outside the cemetery until the rain stopped and the morning fog started to crawl over the grass. By 6, I saw Hank's truck coming down the path. He stepped out, half awake, coffee in hand, and asked why I hadn't started digging. I told him the truth, that when I got there, the grave was already open. At first, he thought I was joking. Then I led him down the hill to plot B7. The fog still hung low, and our boots sank deep into the soaked earth. The hole was right where I left it, but the rain had washed some of the soil down its sides. You could see the shape clearer now, clean edges, perfect depth. It didn't look like a collapse. It looked dug. Hank leaned forward and frowned. "No one's supposed to be buried here yet," he said. "This area was marked as new ground last year." He checked his clipboard, flipping pages. No permits. No records. He went back to the shed to call the office, leaving me there alone again. I stood by the grave, staring into it. The black shape at the bottom was still there, half covered by mud. I climbed down a few feet, careful not to slip. The air was colder inside the pit, almost still. The smell hit me first, wet dirt mixed with something faintly metallic. I thought maybe an animal had fallen in, but when I shined the lantern closer, I realized it wasn't an animal. It wasn't a bag either. It was cloth, like the corner of an old burial shroud, torn and stained. I froze. We hadn't used that kind of wrapping in years. It meant one thing: this wasn't a new grave at all. It was something that had been opened from below or disturbed long after burial. I called up to Hank, but before he could answer, something shifted under the cloth. It wasn't big, just a ripple, like the ground settling. The sound was soft, a faint thud, as if a pocket of air had burst deep down. But it was enough. I climbed out fast, my hands shaking. Hank returned with someone else, Peter, another gravedigger, older than me, gray hair, quiet man. He'd been working these grounds longer than anyone. When he saw the pit, he went pale. Didn't say a word at first. Then he crouched by the edge and whispered, "It's back." I didn't understand. "What do you mean, back?" He looked at me, eyes tired. "About 20 years ago, before your time here, we found a hole just like this. Same size, same section. We filled it in." No one spoke of it again. I wanted to ask more, but Hank came back, saying the office found nothing unusual. No record of digging, no workers scheduled overnight. They told us to refill the grave and leave it for inspection next week. We started shoveling the wet soil back in. Each strike of the spade made a dull sound, heavier than usual. After a few minutes, Peter stopped and said quietly, "Ronnie, do you hear that?" I froze. The rain had stopped completely, but underneath the rhythm of our shovels, there was another sound, faint, hollow, like someone exhaling through a narrow pipe. It came from deep inside the ground. Peter dropped his shovel. "That's enough for tonight," he said, voice shaking. He looked at me with something close to pity. "Don't come here alone again after dark." We covered the hole halfway and left the tools by the shed. I told myself it was the soil shifting, trapped water, anything that made sense. But as I was locking the gate, I turned back one last time. The fog had lifted, and the section where the grave had been was almost invisible now, flat and quiet. Almost. Because right before I got in my truck, I saw something pale lying on top of the half-filled dirt mound. I walked closer, thinking we'd left a glove or a rag. But when I bent down, my stomach twisted. It was a small fragment of fabric, the same old burial cloth I'd seen inside the pit, now lying neatly folded on the surface. I didn't touch it. I just stared, then slowly backed away. When I told Peter about it the next morning, he only said one thing: "That's how it starts, Ronnie. You cover it once, and it finds a way back." That night, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't go near that grave again. But deep down, I knew I'd break it. Some part of me needed to know what was really under there. 3 nights passed before I went back. I told myself I just needed to check the site, make sure the rain hadn't caused any new damage. Truth was, I hadn't slept properly since that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that black shape in the soil. I heard the sound again too, the faint breath coming from under the ground. When I arrived at the cemetery, the air was colder than usual, still and heavy. It was just past midnight. The sky was clear, no rain this time, only a pale half-moon above the trees. I parked by the gate and sat in the truck for a few minutes, listening. No wind, no insects. Just quiet. I grabbed the lantern and walked toward the lower section. My boots left dark prints on the wet grass. The path felt longer than usual. Every sound echoed, my steps, the small jingle of my keys. By the time I reached plot B7, I could already see that something wasn't right. The ground we had filled in was disturbed again. The mound of soil looked softer, like it had been moved or pressed from within. The shovel we'd left by the fence was lying on its side, the handle half buried in mud. I crouched down, shining the light across the dirt. There were marks, long, narrow grooves, as if fingers had dragged through the top layer of soil. My throat went dry. I told myself it could have been an animal, a stray dog maybe. But then I noticed the pattern. The marks weren't random, they formed a curve, almost like a hand reaching upward. I stood there for a long time, lantern trembling in my hand. Then I heard it. A dull sound, soft but distinct, 3 knocks, spaced evenly apart. 1, 2, 3. They came from deep inside the earth. I stumbled back, heart pounding. The knocks stopped. For a moment there was only silence, and then a low, steady sound followed, breathing. I swear it was breathing. Slow, shallow, like someone gasping through packed soil. I stepped closer without realizing it, the light shaking across the ground. "Hello?" I whispered. I don't know why I said it. Instinct, maybe. The night didn't answer, but the breathing quickened for a second and then faded away. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the lantern. It rolled toward the grave and stopped at the edge, the flame flickering weakly. In that dim light, I saw something I can't explain even now. There were footprints inside the pit. Not clear ones, just soft impressions on the sloped wall on the bottom. Bare feet. Too small for mine or Peter's. Fresh, wet, like someone had climbed out, or tried to. I grabbed the lantern and backed away, nearly tripping over the shovel. My whole body felt frozen, like the air itself had turned thick. I could hear a faint whisper behind me then. It wasn't words, not really. More like breath shaped into sound, right at the edge of hearing. I ran. I didn't look back until I reached the truck. My reflection in the windshield startled me. I looked pale, drenched in sweat. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it all. The human mind plays tricks in the dark. That's what I kept repeating. The next morning, I went to find Peter. He was in the maintenance shed, cleaning his tools. When I told him what I'd heard, he didn't seem surprised. He just nodded slowly. "That grave," he said, "it doesn't want to stay closed. Some of them don't." He told me about the last time it happened, years ago. A night dig, same section. The workers heard knocking too. When they came back the next day, the hole had filled itself. Not caved in, filled, flat as if no one had ever dug there. The man who'd led the job quit that same week. I tried to laugh it off, but Peter just stared at me. "Ronnie, listen to me," he said quietly. "If you hear it again, don't answer. Whatever's under there isn't calling for help." That night, I stayed home. I locked every door, left the lights on. Still, I could hear it in my head, the 3 knocks. Over and over, until morning. 2 days later, when I came back to work, something new waited for me. Plot B7 looked perfectly normal again, freshly leveled. No marks, no footprints. But beside it, a new headstone had been placed. No name, just a blank slab of granite. And right in the middle of it, someone had carved a single letter with a screwdriver or a nail. It was an R. I didn't say anything to anyone. I just stood there, the sound of those 3 knocks echoing in my ears, wondering if the grave had been trying to tell me my own name. For 2 days I didn't go near the lower section. I stayed busy with routine work, trimming weeds, fixing the fence, pretending nothing was wrong. But the truth was, every time I looked down that hill, I saw that blank headstone in my mind. The one with the single letter carved into it. The R. By the 3rd morning, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The office sent word that the inspection team would come next week, and Hank asked me to make sure everything looked clean. He sent it like a normal request, but I could see he didn't want to go down there himself. I told him I'd check it out before lunch. When I reached the plot, the fog was thick again. The kind that dulls every sound. The stone was still there, smooth, pale, almost new. I ran my fingers over the carving. It wasn't a machine cut, it was done by hand, rough but deliberate. Someone had scratched that are deep enough to stay. I went to the office later that day to check the burial records. The register book for our section had been updated overnight. There, between 2 unrelated entries, was a line that shouldn't have existed. R. Miles, Section B7, recorded deceased, pending service. That's my name. Ronnie Miles. I stared at it for a long time. The ink was faint, as if the page had been copied from an older record. When I asked Hank who'd written it, he swore he hadn't touched the book. Neither had the office clerk. Peter came in while we were talking. He looked at the entry, didn't say a word, then quietly closed the book. "Leave it," he said. "If it's there, it's meant to be." That night, the wind returned. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me down at the cemetery. Around 9, I decided to drive back. Hank lived across town. Peter was the only one I could call, so I told him to meet me there. He didn't argue. He just said, "I'll bring a flashlight." When we arrived, the gates were open. No one else around. The fog rolled between the stones like slow smoke. We walked down the slope without speaking. The closer we got, the quieter it became. No wind, no crickets, no echo of our footsteps. Just still air. At plot B7, the grave looked freshly covered again, perfectly leveled, as if someone had spent hours smoothing it. The stone with the R stood at the head, cleaner than before. Peter crouched beside it, brushed off the dirt, then frowned. "Ronnie," he said, pointing to the base of the marker. There were new letters beneath the R. Now it read, R. Miles. I laughed nervously. "Someone's screwing with us," I said. But Peter didn't answer. He was looking past me, toward the birch tree behind the graves. "Do you see that?" he whispered. Through the fog, a faint light shimmered. At first I thought it was a reflection from my lantern. Then it moved, slowly, sideways, like someone walking with a small lamp. We stood frozen. The glow drifted between the stones, stopping near the far end of the section. Then it vanished. Peter sighed and said, "We should go." But before we turned, he noticed something else. His shovel was gone from the tool rack near the fence. We searched the ground, and a few yards away, half buried in mud, the handle stuck out. He walked over, pulled it free, and stopped. There was something tied to the metal blade with twine, a small brass watch. I recognized it instantly. It was Peter's. He wore it every day. Only now, the glass was cracked and the hands were frozen at 3:12. Peter went pale. "I didn't lose this," he said quietly. "I left it at home." He looked at me for a long time, then took a deep breath. "Ronnie, don't come here tomorrow. Let me handle it." The next morning, he didn't show up for work. Hank tried calling him all day, no answer. By evening, he sent me to check his house. Peter's truck wasn't there. His front door was locked. When I drove back to the cemetery at dusk, his truck was parked by the gate. Keys still in the ignition. headlights off. I knew where he'd gone before I even looked. I walked down to the lower section, the light fading fast. The soil at plot B7 was disturbed again, just slightly, like something had pressed upward from beneath. The watch that had been tied to the shovel yesterday was now gone. I shined the lantern into the pit. The ground was uneven, the surface cracked. For a second, I thought I saw movement under the dirt, like a hand pushing up, but when I blinked, it was gone. Then I noticed something else. A second headstone had been placed next to mine. Fresh, blank, waiting. The wind picked up as I walked back to the truck, carrying the faint smell of wet soil and iron. I didn't see Peter again after that night. The police said maybe he'd wandered off, maybe he'd driven out of town. But I knew better. Because when I passed the grave the next morning, there were 2 sets of footprints leading to it. One set mine. The other, bare. They closed the Ridgevale cemetery 3 weeks later. Officially, they said it was for soil restoration and structural safety. Unofficially, everyone knew it was because of what happened to Peter. His truck stayed by the gate for days before Hank had it towed. The police came, took statements, measured footprints that led nowhere. They found no trace of him, no body, no belongings. Nothing but the marks in the dirt. I quit the job a few days after that. Packed my things, signed the resignation form, and left town. I told myself I'd never go back, but even as I drove away, I could still see that headstone in my mind. My name carved into the stone, clean and sharp. I moved 2 counties over, started working as a caretaker at a small churchyard. Quieter, smaller, newer. The kind of place where nothing ever happens. For a while, life almost felt normal again. But nightmares came every few weeks. Always the same one, standing at the edge of a grave, hearing the sound of breathing underneath. One morning, about a year later, a letter arrived at the church addressed to me. No return name, just an old postal stamp from Ridgevale. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the same section of the old cemetery, plot B7. But in the picture, the fog was so thick I could barely make out the details. Still, I knew what I was seeing. There were now 3 headstones lined in a row. The one with my name in the middle. On the left, blank. On the right, carved P. Harper. Peter's name. I burned the photo that night, but the image stayed with me. 2 days later, a man from the Ridgevale Council came to the church. Said they were reopening part of the cemetery for exhumations and needed someone familiar with the grounds. He mentioned my name had come up in the old records. I told him no, but he smiled and said, "Your signature's already here." He showed me a form. My name was written on it in black ink. It wasn't my handwriting. That night, the dreams came back, clearer, louder. I saw the grave again, only this time I was inside it, looking up at a circle of gray sky. Dirt fell from above, 1 handful at a time. I woke up gasping, my sheets damp, the smell of soil in the room. A week later, curiosity won. I drove back to Ridgevale at dusk. The road was overgrown, the sign rusted. The gates were locked but broken at the hinge, easy enough to push open. I walked down the familiar slope. The air was still, heavy, colder than I remembered. The lower section was almost unrecognizable, overgrown grass, toppled stones, puddles reflecting the dull sky. But plot B7 was clear, as if someone had kept it clean. 3 headstones in a perfect line. Mine, Peter's, and the blank one still waiting. I stepped closer. My name was no longer carved, it was etched deeper, darker, newer. The dates had been filled in. The second date read last year, the day I left Ridgevale. I touched the cold surface, and my fingers came away black with dust. Then I heard it again. The sound that had haunted me since that first night. 3 slow knocks, rising from beneath the ground. 1, 2, 3. Then silence. I tried to step back, but the soil under my boots shifted, soft and hollow. I fell to one knee, catching myself on the edge of the grave. The dirt was trembling, tiny cracks spreading like veins. And then, from inside the earth, something pale began to push through the corner of a folded cloth, the same burial shroud I'd seen years before. It was moving, inch by inch, as if something underneath was forcing it upward. I stumbled back, heart hammering, eyes locked on the ground. The cloth stopped moving, half buried in the soil. Then a sound followed, a low breath, slow and wet, coming from deep inside the pit. I turned to run, but my lantern flickered out. For a moment, everything went black. When the light came back, the headstones were different. The blank one now had letters carved into it. I stepped closer, shaking, and read the new name. H. Dorset. Hank, the caretaker. That's when I understood. It wasn't random. It was moving through us, one by one, the men who'd touched that grave. The ones who disturbed it. I dropped the lantern and ran to my truck. The gate creaked behind me, swinging open on its own. I didn't look back until I reached the main road. From there, I could see the cemetery hill in the distance, faintly lit by moonlight. And in that pale glow, the ground above Plot B7 looked different, slightly raised, as if something beneath it was pushing upward again. I never returned after that. The cemetery was shut down for good 2 months later, sealed off by the town. They said the land was unstable, unsafe for visitors. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I still wake up to the same sound. 3 knocks. Always from below. Last winter, a small package arrived at my door. No name, no note, just a brass watch inside. The glass cracked. The hands frozen at 3:12. I keep it in a drawer now. I don't open it anymore. Because I know what comes next.